has the address. That's cool. I didn't know.
The geocodes?
Yeah. I didn't know that at all.
Nice.
Yeah, let's see. It doesn't have like the exact address, but I think it's like the street.
Okay. Yep, it is fine to record.
Cool. Hello, Mr. Alinio. We are Aldo and Arturo Harvio, junior students from San Jose State University. We are grateful and appreciative of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. This interview is part of our Engineering 100W assignment and is going to try to give us some exposure to the type of work a professional engineer does on a daily basis. With your permission, would it be acceptable to record this interview as part of our interview transcript for our assignment?
Yes.
Thank you. Now let us begin the interview.
Okay, so the first question is, may you please briefly describe yourself?
Okay, how much detail do you need? Or would you like?
A good amount.
Okay. So, this will be a little combination of personal and professional. I grew up in the area, went to high school locally, then went off to college, went off to UC Davis, enrolled into their civil and environmental engineering program, graduated with a bachelor's degree in civil in 1993. Looked for work, couldn't find work up there. This was at the time when the job market was really tough. As you guys have been seeing, it kind of goes in cycles. So ended up coming back home, and luckily there were a lot of opportunities in this area that opened up that I wasn't aware of, and I applied for a few jobs, got some interviews, which then, although I did not get the position, it opened opportunities for internships. I did not have an internship during school, but these internships gave me practical work experience that gave me some additional understanding and experience to put down on my resume and applications, which then opened up for permanent engineering positions. Worked for various agencies here locally, starting with the county and then with the Association of Monterey State Area Governments, AMBAG. That's our local transportation, metropolitan transportation planning organization. Then a position opened up with TAMC, the transportation agency for Monterey County. Went over there, and then another position opened up, permanent or a full-time position with the county as a technician on their survey crew. Worked in that area for a while. Got a job with the city of Salinas, working in traffic. Moved up within their system. Then another position, or while I was at the city of Salinas, got enough experience to qualify for the professional engineer's license exam. Got my license while I was over there. Then a position opened up over here at the county, Public Works, at that license level. Applied, got it, and that's how I got here. Geez, what, in 2005? So 15 years later, I'm here in various areas serving as a manager. And that's pretty much the intro. Currently hold a position as a senior civil engineer, overseeing the traffic, development, encroachments, transportation permits, special districts, sections of Monterey County Public Works.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the second question. How important is it in your field to express yourself clearly, both through oral and written communication?
For this one, as you've seen in how we function here, I personally think it is critical that engineers be able to express themselves clearly, both in speaking and in writing. A good example is right now with the COVID situation. A lot of our meetings are held via online communications, email and Zoom type meetings. With those media, you can see verbal communication is important because you have to interact with a bunch of folks at a bunch of different levels that may not all be here, you know, where we can just walk over to them and have a conversation. It'll be set up where you will have to verbally communicate ideas, recommendations, things like that, and likely follow up in writing. With how society has changed over the years, written communication is now commonplace. Emails, transfer of documents electronically, putting them into written format through memos, letters, that type of correspondence. That's just how things are shifting these days. So one of the things that I would highly recommend all up and coming professionals is understanding the difference between, I guess, informal written communication electronically versus professional communication. Emails is a big issue. A lot of people get too casual about things, but you have to realize those are official documents, official records that convey a lot of information, both technically as well as appropriateness and presentation. So always keep that in mind. As I've mentioned previously, communication is a big component that may not always be emphasized in a engineering program which focuses on the technical. Right. That's just the nature of the way things are these days. And as you guys have seen, as you move up in your professions, you get less on your own. You know, like it's not like you're an entry-level technician working on a drawing by yourself at your workstation. You end up moving up the ladder, becoming project managers, coordinating with a whole bunch of different disciplines. Some technical, some not. So you have to be able to communicate at the technical level as well as the layperson level. You've also seen a lot of inclusion of social media in projects. That is another form of communication that needs to be accounted for when you're doing public relations for advertising of a new public project. You need to be aware that those are other modes that would require thought in how you present the project. Again, written and essentially verbally, because you may be posting videos and such. Same type of concept. It is an important aspect that is equally as important in my eyes, especially here in the public sector, to the technical aspect of engineering.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
All right. In the public sector, how does the public address environmental issues when faced with them?
Okay, here in California, there's this thing called CEQA. You probably heard it here in the office. CEQA, that's the California Environmental Protection Act. All projects, as defined by CEQA, because there's a definition for what is considered a project, must go through a certain level of environmental review. This is required by state law, and so there is always a component of addressing environmental issues when it comes to the public sector. A lot of the things that the planning people look at is compliance with CEQA for projects for private properties as well as public projects. CEQA is also a critical component when you're looking at public projects that are funded by certain funding sources. If we're getting money from the state, there are certain requirements that require compliance with CEQA, California state law. If we're getting federal monies, there's this program called NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. Comparable to California's, but it's a national level regulation. If we get federal money, we have to comply to all their requirements, of which is compliance with the NEPA regulations. There are some differences, but it all depends on the certain circumstances and situation. So we are very aware of environmental concerns. It is one of those things that we have to do and have to be aware of when we're doing our projects. Again, depending on what role you have on the project team, you may not necessarily need to be involved with it, but overall, we all have to be aware of what our stuff does to our environment. We understand in some cases there will be an effect, likely an adverse effect, but under the regulations there are ways to mitigate or to offset those impacts by doing something something comparable in exchange. So for example, if you cut down trees, there will be a requirement to replace them at a different ratio. So for every single tree you cut, you have to put 5 more somewhere else. If there's a habitat that just happens to have to be disturbed, there's options to relocate that habitat, or maybe create a new area for the flora and fauna to continue and just continue growing and populating the little critters of our world.
Right.
And similarly, if we find those areas, those sometimes, depending on the nature of it, could significantly affect projects. So part of the initial review of developing a project is looking at these potential environmental impacts or effects. And if you happen to go through a protected habitat area, before you go there, you may want to consider realigning your road project to go around it. It'll be much easier, much safer for everyone, and likely less costly in the big picture. So.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, what are some of the toughest ethical dilemmas you have faced in your professional career?
That one's tough, because in our world, in the public sector world, there are a lot of areas where you have to find a good balance between the public and the agency overall. And when I say that, it's typically the bigger group of our community. In traffic, there are a lot of things that have a direct effect, or that the public sees directly. One of the things you might encounter in your traffic engineering classes is things like the signal warrants, the different factors and criteria that you'd have to look at to determine whether or not a traffic signal installation is appropriate for an intersection. One of the criteria under the traffic signal warrants, under the California MUTCD, I believe is where it's at now, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, they have this set of criteria called traffic signal warrants. One of them looks at accidents. In order to put kind of an objective, data-driven metric on whether or not a signal or a situation has elevated to a level that you need a traffic signal, there's a category that takes a look at how many accidents occurred at that location. Being engineers, we are data-driven, so there is a criteria for a certain number of accidents within a certain time period. The public may not understand that we have to rely on that to give good justification from an engineering and technical basis of what we're doing. Somebody who may have had an accident recently, that could have been just a one-off over the past 20 years. So is it really a life safety issue or not? That's where it puts us in that odd position of having to explain to the public why we do or don't do certain engineering projects. It gets really hard when you're talking about the public and people's lives and stuff like that, but we are here for safety. It's just trying to find out, is it appropriate to put something there for the greater good of the community, or is it just something that isn't as high a priority compared to other areas that may have higher accident rates? So when you're looking at that, there is an ethical component about doing what's right versus what's right for the bigger whole. So it's a common thing we experience here. It may not be exactly what you're looking for, but it's something that we see all the time. Others are in the public sector. What may seem as favoring one project or another, sometimes it's just the prioritization of stuff. And again, similarly, what the effects are on the general public versus a single constituent or property owner. Everyone's important, but it's really hard trying to get that balance and prioritization.
All right. Cool. Thank you. All right.
So I know you briefly described to us or gave us your educational path earlier, but can you go a little more detail on how it is that you chose that specific career path?
Sure. Right out of high school, I went to college up at UC Davis. Originally started as electrical engineering. Found out in the upper division classes that it wasn't for me. It was getting too much in those areas where, for me, I like to see stuff, see what I'm doing. When it starts getting too much into like kind of like electromagnetics theory and currents, although I like that stuff, it wasn't for me. But in a way, it's still related to what I'm doing now in traffic engineering, because we do have a lot of facilities that do rely on electrical components, like our traffic signal control boxes. A lot of that, I just got lucky that my background in the electrical engineering field, some of it transferred over into traffic engineering because of that interaction between traffic operations and technology. It also played a good, it was a good background to help me adjust differently to the advances in technology related to like our computerized systems, electronic systems, moving into GIS and understanding basic programming. So understanding the basic programming, like what you probably learn in your undergrad classes, teaches you the fundamentals and kind of the mind process of incorporating programming and technology into your engineering practice. A lot of it is just flow, workflow. Concept is always there, it's just a different task along the way. It also gives you an idea of how to develop additional tools that can help you along the way. Some people don't understand that, yeah, you can create an app that does that. You guys might, as you're doing the work that somebody else thought that's the only way you can do it. This is the only way you can stay on top of things, stay current, and keep advancing. So I digress there. But basically when I switched to civil, it was because I kind of liked the construction aspect of things. I took some traffic engineering classes. One of my instructors was very nerdy, but in a way inspiring as it related to some of the traffic engineering classes and pavement design classes that he was teaching, rather than related to regular roads and stuff. He related to things like roller coasters and racetracks, because the physics of things is the same. You're going down an area or a roadway, there's a turn. The concept is super elevation and friction factors and stuff like that. Those are some of the factors you have to think about when you're designing roadway pavement. What is it going to be used for, and what are the forces that are going to be applied, and what forces need to be applied to counter those vehicle forces to prevent them from running off the road and getting into unsafe situations. Also, I was really into Gran Turismo. Just worked out. Video games. Yes, I am of that generation, and it did play a factor in some of my decision making, but in a way it worked out because I'm still interested in this stuff. I
Right.
still like it, and I've been doing it for a while, and it's pretty good in job satisfaction. And so after I got out of college, again, like I said before, looked for work, and along the way took some classes here and there to stay current on current engineering practices. Nothing formal like an advanced degree. For me, it wasn't necessary at the time, but a lot of the principles are still there. Again, with the engineering profession, the licensure is the more critical thing. That's the one that clearly demonstrates your proficiency. The additional advanced degrees like the masters and PhDs also are good, but the licensing is the one that opens different doors for opportunities later on in the technical field. Not for every engineering program, but or engineering discipline, but it's primarily for the engineering disciplines that do have a life safety issue or a component, like civil engineering, structural engineering, some mechanical engineering type of things, because of the public safety piece, similar to a doctor.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Now, as a professional engineer working for the public, how does a typical workday look like?
Something you guys would never expect. Very little engineering. The good thing is you guys are interning here with a public agency, so you see that. We do a lot of public interaction, a lot of meetings and coordination. And when it comes to the engineering, we use, or for me, I apply a lot of engineering judgment. I may not have to do the daily number crunching, but I apply the understanding of engineering principles, engineering methodologies, and things like that to help guide projects, help staff along, things like that. As you move up in the profession, as I mentioned, you become more of a, you become less number crunching and more overseeing. So as that, in that role, again, a lot of it is managing projects and applying engineering principles to your day-to-day tasks and duties. You're also doing a lot of validating of the technical work. You're reviewing probably like entry-level technicians doing work. In a way, you're mentoring and coaching them along the way, but you're also doing the checking. It's almost like in school. You do homework, take it to your TA to see if you're doing it the right way. They confirm if you are using the right principles, the right calculations and stuff like that. If you are, great. If you're not, then they teach you. So it's kind of a similar role in this level. But you're also acting as the technical expert in the field, so you're also providing that guidance to the public or to, in the public sector, like our upper managers or some of the members of the community or the elected officials.
Thank you.
I know we touched up on communication, but what are other forms of communications that take place in the workplace?
A lot of it these days are meetings. Again, coordination meetings, consultant-ish type meetings, and just general providing information to folks, the public, or other teams within the county. And in terms of written communication, standard professional communication tools, Word type applications, emails, standard written letters. Those tend to be the more formal communications because those are the official documents of projects. The other thing that is considered communication are drawings, your plans and specs, your spreadsheets that do your formulas and present your data and conclusions and things like that. What some people might not realize is that when you can tabulate things and automate some formulas in the form of a spreadsheet, that is a communication tool right there. A lot of times people will just take it on face value, but coming from the technical background, you want to know what formula is in the cell to give you that result. Right. One of the things I learned going through the workplace as well as reviewing work of consultants is if you're going to put in a spreadsheet, somewhere have it available that whoever's reviewing knows what formula you put in, what calculations, what constants and factors were put in there, and where do you get them. Putting the references of your data is critical to confirm whether or not they're applying them appropriately. As the technical expert, that you as the engineer are supposed to make sure that the math was done the right way. It would help you to understand where the formulas came from. Are they right out of the standard highway capacity manual for traffic, or right out of the building code for structural calcs? You want to know how that's built in there, because a lot of times there could be a typo in your formula. You miss a factor. Maybe the decimal got put in the wrong place. When you're doing your exams, a lot of times they want you to show your work. That's how you learn whether or not you made a mistake in the formula or not. So keep that in mind when you're doing stuff like that. You may not need to put it in what you present, but have it as your backup so you know what's going on. It also helps you in trying to recreate it next time, because that is a huge thing. If you put that much effort into a really good piece of work that becomes your new tool, your new app, whatever, you don't want to recreate it each time.
Right.
A lot of things now are visual based, like the GIS, mapping. Those are other forms of communication that help people who are more visually, who are more visual communicators than written word. That saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. It is very true for us. You put a plan in front of us and maybe an aerial, you can get you can find out what's happening really quick rather than reading a 5-page report on it. So keep that in mind. A lot of times visuals are really good, especially when you're doing virtual communication, online communication via email. Sometimes, well, I do know for a fact that when you're communicating back and forth by email, sometimes things get lost. You send a picture, talk about it, and you're done in a few seconds. So again, another communication tool just to be aware of.
Alright, thanks. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
As a civil engineering major, how relevant are these classes taken at universities when compared to the professional world?
For example, like dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
thermodynamics, hydraulics, those type of classes, how relevant are they to actual field work that you do as an engineer?
As an engineer, I would say they are extremely important. How much of it is a different question, because the principles, again, are critical in understanding things like material properties. Here's a good civil application. I think we talked about this a little bit before when we were talking about a bridge deck. Properties of materials, all based on thermodynamic principles, and dynamics and loading. Materials such as concrete are better in certain applications and certain levels of application of forces. Like in compression, they do really well, but in tension, they don't. Things like steel, really good in tension, not so great in compression. But steel is also more affected by heat. So, like we learned in thermal classes in basic physics, add more heat, materials expand. Depends on the properties of materials, some expand more than others. When you're putting these materials in close proximity to each other, there is the possibility that they expand or contract and compromise your structure. You need to build in safety factors related to it and account for those principles. If you're not aware of the basics, you might miss all of that. Dynamics also is a factor because a lot of times, well, in civil, you focus on statics. Dynamics is more when things start moving. For civils, once things start moving, then it starts getting really bad, but that's when it kicks into the dynamic aspect of things. If you're aware of the basics of dynamics, then you can already anticipate what may potentially affect a static structure. You also understand like the dynamics of moving vehicles on roadway pavement and things like that, where you would get things like the interaction between high torque wheels and soft asphalt. There's a tendency that would tear it up. You want to take that into consideration depending on the application. So like on a racetrack, the pavement has to be of a different mix versus the regular roadways, just to withstand the forces put on it. I would also go even further saying that a lot of your GE classes would come into play along the way, like the reading and writing type classes, reading comprehension. You're going to be doing a lot of reports, or trying to interpret reports, but also writing reports. You have to know your audience, know who you're writing to, so you can set it up in a way that it's practical and usable. Sometimes a lot of the other classes come into play because, again, when you're developing relations with other teams and other members, sometimes having that common factor helps establish that connection and rapport with other groups that are not as technical. Right. So having an understanding of the other teams and their perspectives helps you in a different way. It's more of a interpersonal relations perspective, or a broad integration of things with teams and interacting with just a whole different set of non-engineers.
Cool. So the next question is, do you feel as a licensed civil engineer, you have way more opportunity than someone who doesn't have a license?
This one's an easy one, and it's a relatively short answer. Yes. My position right now requires a license. If I didn't have a license, I wouldn't be here. That's how it is with a lot of public agencies. You can get to a certain level without a license, but in order to get to the other higher levels, you need the license. That's plain and simple. That's why I was saying the license in some cases is more critical than the advanced degrees, because the license is, at least in our profession, holds a different level of professionalism, expertise, and liability than just a advanced degree. because I'm not sure if you're aware, part of the licensing exam does include a variety of things, not just technical, but also understanding the professional engineers code, and there's an ethical component there that relates to, you know, applying your knowledge in a good way. So you do learn the legal aspects of things and the legal requirements, and that does play into kind of the liability aspect of things.
Very crucial.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. How critical do you believe internships are before obtaining a bachelor's degree in your major?
That one's an interesting one because it depends. Some programs have a good mix of work-study, others don't. In hindsight, I would say internships are always good. They're always helpful in learning the real-world applications. And for me, if I understood how certain things would apply in the real world, in the professional world, I probably would have paid more attention in class. Sometimes the professors don't tell you that because they are focused on their subjects. So maybe some of your advanced math teachers are good examples, like my physics instructors. And you've seen this. They think that you're in their class because you want to be a physicist. That's not the case all the time. You're just there because you need to understand the basics as a prereq for your engineering classes. But you may not know that or know what to extract in the classes if you don't know what you're going to be applying in the workplace, which you could learn through an internship. It also helps you figure out, is this really where I want to go with my profession? A lot of times I've had interns that decide to change majors, and that's okay. They didn't know what the profession was like, and I think it's a good idea to find out sooner than later, so at least you can change your curriculum early enough to get something that is more suited for you. But they are a very good thing. I highly recommend them. Not necessary. I mean, I didn't have one until afterwards, but in a way it kind of set me behind while I gained practical work experience. Because these days everyone looks for a good combination of experience and education. If you have both, you've got a head start.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the last questions is, what advice can you give a civil engineering major to decide whether to work in a career either in the public or the private sector?
The practical side of me, especially in today's current employment environment, is take the first offer you get and then build up from there. It depends. I started in the public sector and I just stayed there. It just worked out for me. Private sector, some folks prefer that. You've seen here that public sector has a lot of less technical aspects of things. Private sector, you can focus on just doing the calculations, the engineering drawings, that kind of stuff. Again, depends on what you like doing, but one of the things in the private sector is jobs, the projects that the companies have are critical in maintaining work for the employees and staying in business. So the demands on time commitments could be different in the private sector. Private sector is driven by deliverables. So you got to get stuff done, move on to the next one. Public sector, you are serving the public. Deliverables is part of it, but first and foremost, at least from my perspective, is you work for the public and you try to do what you can for the community. A little different in focus, but the concepts of applying your expertise are the same. It's just you're in a different part of the process. Public sector, we could hire consultants in the private sector to do the work for a public project. So there's a way you can still be working private, but for public. It's just kind of different. Public sector does have its perks in terms of benefits, but your ultimate pay may not be the same, because in the private sector, sometimes you're compensated by a package that you would have to take your own salary to buy your benefits. Maybe. Some places are like that, others provide a benefit package, kind of depends. So in the private sector, you may have to think about that a little differently. At least that's from my experience. But one thing that I could state from my experience seeing other employees here is that it's one of those things that it depends on where you are in life. Some things here, it's much more structured, and the expectation is you work during business hours and you can go home and enjoy your family. Private sector, again, based on deliverables and commitments and agreements and contracts, you may have to put in extra hours just to get stuff done if you fall behind in schedule. Sometimes you're also paid lump sum. If you go beyond that in your budget, that's on the company to absorb. Just again, some of the things to consider if you're working for a private company or want to form your own private company. At least again, that's just come from my experience.
That's good to know.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of our questions and this interview. We want to thank you for your time, Mr. Alinio.
You're very welcome.
And well, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for knowledge, because at least personally, I learned a lot. Things that I know.
Good.
Me
Good.
too.
I'm glad.
I had no idea.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.